Why is Australia so rich? The lucky country. Australia is rich, very rich. Hardly a day goes by without an Australian newspaper or magazine reporting on the activities of some of the country's wealthiest citizens. In fact, they are among the world's wealthiest citizens, and about 10% of its adult population is worth more than $1 million. Why is Australia so rich, and what sets it apart from the rest of the world? Let's find out. In 1972, Australia was the wealthiest country in the world in terms of GDP per capita, richer than Switzerland, and the United States, and even the United Kingdom. Later, it has some economic setbacks, but it is still among the world's richest countries. Even if I say that Australia was born rich, that will not be an exaggeration. Despite those short-term economic setbacks, Australia has remained relatively rich globally for nearly 2 centuries. So what's the story? Let's take a step back to where it all started. In 1964, author Donald's book entitled The Lucky Country was quite popular in Australia. One of the ideas of the book was that Australians were simply riding on the sheep's back to economic success, where everyone was getting benefits from it. This means the Australian wealth didn't come from the hard work of the Australian people or their excellent leaders, but rather by luck. This idea seemed quite controversial, but it also has a point. Australia has an abundance of natural resources in proportion to its population. From the beginning, Australia's wealth came from wool, then gold, and later agricultural products and minerals. In 1788, Australia was established as a penal settlement for British convicts because the prisons in the United Kingdom were overcrowded. The British Crown saw Australia as a perfect territory to send tons of inmates. It is said that for over 80 years, they sent over 160,000 convicts, including both men and women. Since the first inmates arrived in the colony of New South Wales, capitalist activities suddenly developed, and convict labor was used to build roads, hospitals, and other infrastructures. Other free settlers also used the labor sent from the UK to enhance other economic activities, such as wool production. After 1810, transportation significantly increased, which provided the colony with cheap and skilled labor. As laborers, craftsmen, clerks, and trades, many convicts possessed the skills needed in the new settlements, which immensely helped in the construction process. When their terms expired, they were permanently added to the free population of Australia. From the 1820s and onwards, economic growth was increasingly based on the production of fine wool and other useful commodities for markets in the United Kingdom and the industrializing economies of northwestern Europe. To finance this trade, a number of banks were established in London in the 1830s, including the Bank of Australasia in 1835 and the Union Bank of Australia in 1837. 2 major depressions slowed this expansion in the 1840s and 1890s, but shortly after, it was boosted in significant ways by the rich gold discoveries in Victoria in 1851. The potential for large profits in pastoralism and mining drew significant British capital. At the same time, overall expansion was supported by massive government overlays for transportation, communication, and urban infrastructure, all heavily reliant on British finance. As the economy grew, large-scale immigration became necessary to meet the growing demands for workers, especially after convict transportation to the eastern mainland was discontinued in 1840. The expenses of immigration were funded by colonial governments, with settlers primarily from the United Kingdom bringing skills that contributed significantly to the economy's growth. All of this laid the groundwork for the formation of free colonial societies. As a result, the institutions associated with these, such as secure property rights, the rule of law, and stable and democratic political systems were strengthened. The second major factor that skyrocketed the Australian economy was the discovery of gold in 1851, which led to gold rushes in many regions of Australia and altered the direction of the Australian economy. Following the discovery, many workers quit their jobs and traveled to the gold fields in search of fortune. The gold rush resulted in a massive influx of people from all over the world, including many non-British sources. Victoria became Australia's gold mining center in the 1850s, with an increasing population from 76,000 in 1851 to 540,000 in 1861. Australia's population went from 43,000 to 1.7 million in just a short period. By 1860, wool was once again the primary source of economic growth. The rapid population growth and enormous goldfield wealth fueled a 40-year boom. Melbourne spread eastwards and northwards across the surrounding flat grasslands and southwards down Port Phillip's eastern shore. Middle-class families moved to the newer suburbs, and working people moved to the older ones in the city. The influx of educated English gold seekers resulted in the rapid expansion of schools, learned societies, churches, libraries, and art galleries. The wealth obtained from gold caused a surge in building activity, particularly in Melbourne. In 1853, the first telegraph line in Australia was built between Melbourne and Williamstown. In 1854, Melbourne saw the construction of Australia's first railway. Finally, the post-World War II boom was the ultimate driving force that fueled the Australian economy. Australia's relationship with the international economy was transformed into something more significant. As Britain's previous role as a global power waned, Australia's reliance on the British capital, labour, and markets also dwindled. The UK share of Australian exports fell from 37% to 13%, while imports from the UK fell from 50% to 22%. Although ties with the United Kingdom stayed significant, on the other hand, Australia's economic, political, and cultural ties with the United States grew in importance. Imports from the United States increased from 9% to 26% of total imports. In the post-World War II boom, the rapid industrialization of some Asian economies, particularly Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, created new export opportunities for Australia's vast reserves of raw minerals. Australia continued to rely heavily on raw material exports, as it has done in the past, but these exports increasingly took the shape of minerals and energy commodities, with Japan becoming an increasingly important market. The Japanese share of Australian exports rose from 4% to 22%. This development prompted state and federal governments to implement policies to capitalize on an anticipated resources boom. Governments borrowed a lot from abroad once more to fund long-term investments in a variety of mining and resource projects. Australia not only showed economic resilience and rapid growth in the 1800s and 1900s, but also in the modern period. Australia overcame the global financial crisis unscathed and prevented a massive recession. People were shocked at how Australia managed to get through such massive financial crisis when the other countries couldn't. Let me clear this up for you. The simple fact is that when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, all these countries were in the disaster zone because they had high government debt and high budget deficits, making them highly vulnerable to adverse shocks. If any of these governments had faced the crisis with no government debt and consistent budget surpluses, they would have remained pillars of strength. Now, Australia's economy is in excellent shape before the global financial crisis of 2008, with zero national debt, robust growth, substantial assets, and budget surpluses. So these solid foundations, combined with favorable trade terms, ensured that Australia would emerge unscathed from the crisis. The most important lesson from the global financial crisis is not what happened after it, but what happened before it happened. This can be summarized. Don't place your country in a financial vulnerability zone. According to a new study, Australia now has 2.2 million millionaires. In 2021, half of Australians had more than $400,000 in wealth, which is to say, they had the highest median wealth in any country. The conclusion we can draw is that those who are fortunate who live in a country where the median wealth per adult and average wealth per adult is the world's first and second highest, proving a powerful nation. They're not just super wealthy. Their wealth inequality is much lower than that of other developed nations. In addition to that, having sufficient freedom and flexibility in its economy, Australia can quickly recover in any adverse event of a crisis, which indicates that Australia's economic and policy fundamentals are very strong. Thank you all for watching the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Let us hear thoughts on the world's richest country. And will Australia be able to continue its economical dominance in the coming days? Take care and see you in the next video.